The old Vortarian cruiser had been limping through space for 3 weeks, its engine core hemorrhaging energy, its occupants struggling for hope. When Captain Merc of the Carissa clan first spotted the small, unremarkable moon orbiting a gas giant, he had only one thought: survival. They needed a place to land, make repairs, and continue their exile. None of them could have imagined that this emergency landing would transform not just their lives, but the destiny of 2 species. 300 years later, that desperate moment of first contact had become history. History that teacher Solothar was determined his students would understand. "None of you is paying attention. Guess the past is irrelevant to you." Teacher Solothar's voice cut through the classroom's ambient noise. The whispered conversations, the soft tapping of fingers on desks, the occasional yawn. He surveyed the room with mounting frustration, watching as most of the students continued their disengagement. One was staring out the window at the bustling cityscape beyond, another was doodling in her notebook, and a boy in the back row had his head down entirely, possibly asleep. Solothar walked between the desks, the fabric of his formal teaching robe brushing against chairs as he passed. "Guess to all of you this life we live here is the normal. No questioning, no interest in the past, no wondering how we got here." The shame that flickered across some faces gave him a small measure of satisfaction. At least, they had the decency to recognize their disrespect, even if they couldn't summon the energy to correct it. His gaze moved methodically across the classroom, observing the diverse group of students before him. The human students sat mostly in the back rows, a habit that persisted across generations despite integration efforts. Their skin tones varied widely, from deep chocolate brown to pale pink, some with freckles dotting their cheeks. Their hair ranged from tight curls to straight locks, some cropped short and others falling past shoulders. When called out, their shame manifested physically, fidgeting with writing implements, eyes downcast, apologetic half-smiles. The Vortarian students, like Solothar himself, were unmistakable with their blue skin. Each bore unique patterns of white dots across their faces and hands, family markings that told stories of lineage to those who knew how to read them. Their long, pointed ears, currently lowered in discomfort at being reprimanded, could express emotions as clearly as human facial expressions. Emerald eyes, large and luminous against their blue skin, blinked with vertical eyelids rather than horizontal ones. Their 5-fingered hands lacked nails or claws, ending instead in sensitive pads capable of detecting minute temperature variations. All Vortarians, regardless of gender, wore their hair long, a cultural tradition that had survived centuries away from their ancestral home. Some had braided theirs intricately, white beads woven into the deep blue-black strands, while others wore it loose, cascading down their backs like liquid night. Most fascinating to Solothar, though perhaps most troubling to society at large, were the hybrid students. They exhibited a mesmerizing blend of features from both parent species. Some had human skin tones with faint Vortarian dot patterns just barely visible. Others had the blue skin of the Vortarian heritage but human eyes with round pupils rather than the vertical slits of pure Voltarians. Their ears often split the difference, slightly pointed but without the full extension of Vortarian anatomy. Zahara, a Vortarian student in the front row, finally broke the uncomfortable silence that had fallen over the classroom. Her white dot pattern was particularly dense across her forehead, marking her as a descendant of the original Carissa clan. "All the adults care about is telling us how special the Stellaris moon is, how privileged we are, and how important it is to learn our history. But it gets boring the 100 times you hear it, you know." Solothar studied her, despite being from an older generation that still marveled at what both species had achieved together. He understood her sentiment, even if he didn't agree with it. He represented a generation that had witnessed remarkable cooperation between species, but, to these children, This integrated society was simply normality, nothing to be celebrated or examined. "Well then, Zahara," he challenged, "if you are so tired of hearing our history, perhaps you can explain to the class how this moon we call home became the powerhouse it is today. How did we claim this entire system for ourselves, and gain recognition as an independent force by the Galactic Council?" Zahara's confident expression faltered. Well, there was an old ship needing repair, right?" Her ears lowered nervously. "And the Voltarians found the humans cute and decided to stay here." The class erupted in laughter. Solothar didn't suppress his smile. Zahara's answer was almost entirely wrong, but her discomfort had accomplished what his lecture could not. The class was now paying attention. "The only thing you got right, Zahara, is that the foundation of Stellaris did indeed start with a single ship needing repairs that landed on this moon, but the rest was not a tale of love or a tale of friendship at first contact." He paused, looking around at the now attentive student faces. "It was a tale of struggle against the unforgiveness of space, of how both humans and Voltarians joined forces to turn the barren land of this moon into a thriving world, how friendship and later love survived for generations in a place that the universe itself fought against them." Seth, a human student with white skin and short hair, raised his hand. Unlike many of his classmates, he had his notebook open, pen poised to take notes. "I've heard that story before. But what I don't know is why the Voltarians came to this moon of all places for repairs." Solothar nodded appreciatively. It was a thoughtful question, showing genuine interest, and provided the perfect segue into deeper historical context. "The first Voltarians of the Carissa clan were fleeing," he explained. "Fleeing from space pirates, yes, but more importantly, they were exiled from their homeworld. Their ship was damaged during the pursuit, and they were in a desperate situation that forced an emergency landing." He walked to the whiteboard at the front of the classroom and leaned against it. "Pirates had been hunting the Voltarian ship for weeks. Their ship systems were failing. Life support was compromised. From orbit, this moon seemed uninhabited. The discovery of a human settlement was unexpected. The Voltarians expected hostility, but were prepared to pay or beg for assistance if needed. Instead, they found something unexpected: hospitality from human settlers." The classroom had grown quiet, the students' attention captured by the narrative. Some were even taking notes now, questions forming on their faces. Even Zahara, who had been so dismissive earlier, leaned forward slightly in her seat, her ears perked forward in the Voltarian expression of interest. Seth and Hannah, a hybrid student with light blue skin and human-shaped eyes, began a spirited discussion about the ship's size. Seth was convinced only a few individuals had been on the ship, while Hannah insisted there were at least dozens of Voltarians. Their debate spread to nearby students, gradually evolving into a humans versus hybrids argument, each group defending a different hypothesis about the ship size and passenger count. Solothar allowed the discussion to continue for a moment, pleased to see them engaging with the historical material. When it threatened to become too heated, he intervened. "The ship was old, but very big," he explained. "Our founding fathers numbered in the hundreds on the Voltarian side. As I've said before, they were the Carissa clan, an entire tribe expelled from their homeworld because they lost a war against another faction. The survivors of this war were the ones who were expelled." The classroom fell silent again, all eyes on him. The previous boredom had been completely replaced by genuine interest. Solothar paused deliberately, allowing the suspense to build. He walked slowly through the desks and moved to the window, looking at the houses and trees below. The school building stood a few floors high in a residential district, providing a view of countless houses and gardens. Red and green trees dotted the landscape, plants from both species coexisting in harmony. The red-leafed Vortarian flora, with their unusual photosynthesis processes, had adapted to the moon's conditions alongside Earth's green vegetation. What had once been barren ground was now thriving with integrated plant life, a visual parallel to the integration of the species themselves. "A teacher?" Zahara's voice came from behind him. "I didn't know we had suffered so much before coming to this moon. How were our people received when they arrived? And why did they decide to stay?" Solothar turned back to the class, pleased that even his most skeptical student was now engaged. He walked back to the front of the classroom as he spoke. "The humans on this moon then were different from what we are now," he explained. "This moon was barren, and there were 3 distinct human groups present when the Vortarians arrived. Criminals seeking a place beyond legal reach, tech deniers wanting isolation from civilization, and a small group of scientists studying the soil and atmosphere to create a farm world. The total human population was only a couple thousand." "So the scientists welcomed the Vortarians," Zahara interrupted. "They must have helped repair the ship, right?" Solothar laughed. "Actually, the first contact was with the criminals, not the scientists. The criminals had the most resources on the moon. They were using it for illegal plant cultivation and weapons storage. Importantly, they had repair equipment suitable for a large ship." He leaned against his desk. "The criminals offered hospitality because they had no conflict of interest with the aliens who needed help. It was simple human nature to help those in need, especially when the helpers had nothing to lose. There was no practical alliance at first, just compassion despite their criminal status." The students exchanged incredulous looks, and conversation erupted throughout the classroom. Solothar had successfully disrupted their comfortable historical narratives, and they were fully engaged in historical discovery. Hannah suddenly spoke loudly, asking her classmates for silence. She looked visibly disturbed by the revelation, gazing directly at Solothar with concern in her eyes. "Does that mean we're all descendants of criminals?" she asked worriedly. The question clearly touched on her sense of identity and heritage. Solothar didn't laugh this time, recognizing the genuine distress in her question. His heart felt heavy seeing her concern, and he chose his words carefully out of compassion for his students. "No living being in the universe has ancestors who didn't do something bad at some point," he said gently, offering a universal context to ease her identity concerns. "But the criminals were only the first contact, not the entire story. The tech-denying humans group developed a strong interest in the Voltarians. They lacked the manpower to develop the moon, so they actively courted the Voltarians to stay and help cultivate the barren land. This group offered land and the first job opportunities to the Carissa clan." He paused, allowing his words to sink in. "And the Carissa clan had nowhere else to go. They feared returning to space and facing the pirates again. Here, they found respect and help from the humans. This moon offered the first spark of hope after their exile. There were both practical and emotional reasons for their settlement." Silence filled the classroom as the students processed this information. Solothar observed the transformation in the classroom atmosphere with satisfaction. This felt like a completely different class from the one he had faced at the beginning of the lesson. The teaching moment had transcended mere historical facts to touch on questions of identity and meaning, exactly what history was supposed to do. Seth raised his hand again, now fully invested in the story that had unfolded before him. I still don't understand how this initial settlement became what Stellaris is today. How did a barren moon become a system-wide power recognized by the Galactic Council? Solothar appreciated the question. The boy was thinking beyond the initial narrative, seeking to understand the transformation process that had shaped their current reality. A valid question, Solothar acknowledged. The path from settlement to prosperity wasn't easy. The environmental challenges alone would have defeated less determined people. He activated the classroom's environmental simulation, and the wall projection shifted to show the moon as it had been 3 centuries ago. The moon's gravity is approximately 0.86 Earth standard, which made traditional Earth agriculture difficult. The temperature fluctuated dramatically as our moon orbited the gas giant, creating seasons that changed not yearly but monthly. The atmosphere required plants that could process different gas compositions than either Earth or Vortarian vegetation was accustomed to, and water. Water was perhaps our most precious and limited resource. The simulation showed barren, rocky landscapes with minimal surface water. Several students leaned forward in their seats. But the Carissa clan brought something invaluable with them, Solothar continued. Seeds from their homeworld, specifically developed for extreme conditions. He zoomed the simulation to show the distinctive red-leafed flora of Vortarian origin. The plants had broad, flat leaves with intricate vein patterns, designed to capture light from different spectrums than Earth plants typically utilized. These were plants capable of photosynthesis under different light conditions than Earth vegetation. Their root systems could extract nutrients from mineral-poor soil, and most importantly, the seeds were designed to survive radiation and harsh conditions, originally developed for generation ships and colony worlds. Solothar switched the simulation to show the early settlement efforts. The settlers used thermal vents to generate energy. They created greenhouse domes before eventually transferring the plants to the open moon surface. The soil required engineering, a mixture of Earth techniques and Vortarian soil chemistry. The small science team played a crucial role in analyzing and adjusting the process. The simulation displayed primitive dome structures clustered around steaming vents in the moon's surface. Inside these transparent structures, small patches of red and green plants grew side by side in carefully prepared soil beds. What emerged was a series of joint human-Vortarian innovations, Solothar said, his voice warming with pride. The criminals' equipment, which they used to transport their own plants, was repurposed for infrastructure. Irrigation systems were designed to maximize the limited water. The tech deniers contributed manual labor and traditional farming techniques that required minimal technology, but produced sustainable results. And the scientists measured progress and solved emerging problems. The students watched as the time lapsed forward, showing the gradual spread of vegetation across the moon's surface. Several were taking notes now, their previous boredom forgotten. Zahara looked visibly impressed by what her ancestors had accomplished. The friendly atmosphere extended across species lines, though Solothar noted that the hybrid students remained somewhat quiet, perhaps still processing the implications of earlier revelations about their heritage. "Your behavior has been exemplary," Solothar said, satisfied with their engagement. "Let's move the timeline forward to discuss the centuries that followed." He adjusted the projection again. "To understand Stellaris as it exists today, we need to take a long-term perspective, connecting the initial hardships with the current prosperity." The projection now showed fields of mature vegetation covering vast areas of the moon's surface. The red Vortarian plants and green Earth vegetation grew in patterns that complemented each other. In some areas, hybrid plants with purple leaves demonstrated the results of careful botanical engineering. As the agricultural foundation stabilized, something unexpected happened, Solothar explained. The unique soil composition and atmospheric conditions created new flavors in both human and Vortarian crops. Earth wheat grown in our soil had a nutty undertone that didn't exist elsewhere. Vortarian tuber plants developed a sweeter profile than their homeworld variants, and certain Vortarian spices grew more potently in our conditions. He switched the display to show early settlement kitchens, where humans and Vortarians worked together, experimenting with combinations of ingredients from both worlds. Cultural exchange happened most rapidly through food, he continued. Each species discovered they enjoyed certain preparations from the other's cuisine. New dishes emerged that combined elements of both culinary traditions. Seth raised his hand again. Is that how stellar wine was created? Solothar smiled broadly. Exactly. The discovery that changed our economic destiny, a particular root extract from Vortarian plants, when combined with earth herbs and fermented, created a beverage that appealed to both species' palates. The mineral content of our water created distinct flavor profiles impossible to replicate elsewhere. New brewing techniques were developed specifically for these unique ingredients. Hannah spoke up without raising her hand, her earlier hesitancy forgotten. And that became our first export, right? The thing that put Stellaris on the galactic map. Indeed, Solothar confirmed. The first shipments back to human colonies and established Vortarian settlements created immediate demand. Our unique products commanded premium prices because they couldn't be replicated elsewhere. Trading routes were established, partnerships formed, and most critically, the wealth generated was reinvested in our infrastructure and expansion. The projection now showed the gradual development of the settlement into a proper colony, with permanent structures replacing temporary ones. Roads connected growing communities, small spaceports facilitated the increasing trade. Within 2 generations, our profits exceeded our spending capacity, Solothar explained. We invested in education and research facilities. Crime became less profitable than legitimate business. Both humans and Vortarians found more opportunity here than on their respective homeworlds. The projection zoomed out to show the entire moon transformed from barren rock to a thriving colony. Lights from settlements sparkled across the surface, connecting the transportation networks. Orbital facilities appeared, then expanded, demonstrating the growing space infrastructure. Seth and several other students asked follow-up questions about the economics of early Stellaris. A lively group discussion about the relative value of different exports ensued. Hannah asked specifically about the distribution of wealth between species, clearly concerned about equity in their shared history. The prosperity was shared, Solothar assured her, initially through necessity. Neither species could have succeeded alone on this moon. The entire enterprise depended on cooperation. A quieter hybrid student in the back, who had remained silent throughout the lesson, finally raised his hand. His pattern of white dots was sparse and irregularly spaced, marking him as likely related to a family that had arrived after the original settlement. Was it always peaceful between humans and Vortarians? He asked, his voice soft but carrying clearly in the suddenly quiet classroom. The question created momentary tension as both human and Vortarian students exchanged uneasy glances. Solothar appreciated the students' courage in asking what many probably wondered but hesitated to voice. An excellent question, he said, and the honest answer is no. There was one significant conflict over Stellaris leadership, approximately 200 years after settlement. He adjusted the projection once more, showing a colony now well established and clearly prosperous. With prosperity came questions about governance. Who would lead Stellaris as it grew into a significant power? The two species had different philosophical approaches to leadership. The display split to show two competing government centers that had developed on opposite sides of the main settlement. The human faction wanted a democratic election system based on Earth models. The Voltarian leadership preferred their traditional clan-based council structure. Initial negotiations broke down, and for a brief period the colony experienced separation, violence and competition between the factions. Several students shifted uncomfortably in their seats. This was evidently not the history they had expected to hear. But this separation immediately revealed something crucial, Solothar continued. The mutual dependence that had developed over generations, certain agricultural processes required both species working together to succeed. The beverage production that formed the backbone of our economy suffered without cooperation. Export quality declined rapidly, with immediate economic consequences. He zoomed in on meeting halls where representatives from both factions gathered, faces serious but determined. Economic reality forced the resumption of dialogue. What emerged was a hybrid governance system, an elected council with constitutional guarantees for both species' cultural practices. Most interestingly, this compromise system proved more effective than either original proposal. It combined the best elements of both traditions and created something new, something uniquely Stellarian. Deep silence fell over the classroom as students absorbed the complexity of their history. Several exchanged thoughtful glances. Zahara raised her hand, clearly preparing to ask about implications for present-day governance. But before she could speak, Hannah's hand shot up with unusual urgency. Solothar nodded towards Hannah, whose normally confident demeanor had shifted. She seemed hesitant, almost nervous, as she lowered her hand slowly. She began, her voice quieter than usual. I have a question about myself and the other hybrids. How did we come to be? All eyes in the classroom turned toward her. The pure Voltarian and human students showed varying expressions of curiosity and discomfort, while the other hybrid students seemed to lean forward slightly, clearly invested in the answer. Hannah cleared her throat and continued, clearly determined despite her nervousness. What I mean is, how did both species agree that creating a new intelligent species was a good idea? The classroom remained silent, but the quality of the silence had changed. This was no longer about abstract historical events, but about the very identity of students sitting among them. Solothar could feel the weight of responsibility in providing an answer that acknowledged the complexity without diminishing anyone's sense of belonging. He felt like he was walking on eggshells. Many teachers avoided this topic entirely, referring students to their parents or to clinical biological explanations that ignored the social and ethical dimensions altogether. That's an important question, Hannah, Solothar said, carefully considering his words. And one that deserves a thoughtful answer. He moved away from the window and back towards the center of the classroom, feeling the eyes of every student following him. First, I want to be clear that hybrid children weren't the result of a government program or scientific experiment, he began. There were many couples, humans and Voltarians, who had built lives together through genuine love and commitment, with a particular desire for children of their own. He gestured toward the images of early Stellaris that still glowed in the projected display. As our society stabilized and prosperity increased, these relationships naturally evolved. Mixed couples had established homes together, built businesses, and contributed to our community. Their desire for families was a logical extension of their lives they had created together. Several of the hybrid students nodded almost imperceptibly, having heard this part of the story from their parents. These relationships existed long before hybrid children became possible, Solothar continued. The demand from these families eventually led to research that explored the possibility of genetic compatibility, but it's crucial to understand that this was driven by existing relationships and desires, not by scientific curiosity or something careless. This is the story the Galactic Council likes to tell. He noted the subtle relaxation in Hannah's posture, though her eyes remained fixed on him, waiting for more. Several other hybrid students appeared to be holding their breath. Politically, Stellaris had reached a point of significant independence, Solothar said, shifting toward the governance aspects. Our society was powerful enough by that time to make decisions independently, without requiring approval from human or Vortarian homeworlds. He activated the simulation again, showing the Stellaris Council chambers of approximately a century ago. The display showed a council with representatives from both species engaged in what appeared to be intense debate. The decision to support hybrid families wasn't unanimous at first, Solothar admitted. There were concerns from both species about unforeseen consequences. Medical professionals worried about potential health complications for hybrid children. Cultural preservationists from both sides feared dilution of traditions and heritage. Some philosophical and religious leaders questioned the ethics of creating what they considered a new species. He adjusted the projection to show contentious council meetings from that era, with passionate speakers at podiums and divided audiences. The debates lasted for years, he continued. Studies were commissioned, experts consulted, and public forums held, but ultimately Stellaris defended its citizens' rights to form families as they chose. The deciding factor wasn't just abstract principles of freedom, but the visible reality of these couples' contributions to our society. Hannah nodded, seemingly satisfied with this part of the answer. But were there objections from Earth or the Vortarian homeworlds? I've heard stories about diplomatic incidents. Solothar was impressed by her knowledge. You've done some research of your own, I see. Yes, there were objections, particularly from conservative factions on both homeworlds. Some human organizations expressed concerns about playing God. Some Vortarian clan leaders worried about dilution of their genetic legacy. He adjusted the simulation to show diplomatic communications and what appeared to be protests on distant worlds. But by that point, Stellaris had developed significant economic leverage through our exports, Solothar explained. Our agricultural techniques were sought after for other challenging environments. We had built enough military capacity to defend our borders, and most importantly, we had established legal autonomy within the galactic framework. He switched the projection to show what appeared to be a courtroom setting with representatives from multiple species. The Galactic Council's ruling on Stellaris sovereignty was a landmark decision that established our right to self-governance in internal matters. This included the right of our citizens to form families according to their own choices rather than homeworld dictates. Solothar looked around the classroom, seeing a mix of expressions. Some students nodded with familiarity, others appeared to be processing new information. The hybrid students, in particular, seemed to be absorbing this historical context for their own existence with intense interest. So, we were a political statement, asked another hybrid student from the back of the room, his tone somewhere between curious and concerned. "No," Solothar replied firmly. "You were the children your parents wanted. Everything else came later. We asked for forgiveness, not permission." This seemed to reassure not just the student who had asked, but several others as well. Hannah's expression had transformed from uncertainty to something approaching pride. "Thank you," she said simply. "No other teacher has ever explained it that way." Solothar inclined his head in acknowledgement. He glanced at the time display and realized their session had run longer than scheduled. He approached the window, noticing students from other classes already streaming through the courtyard below. "I believe that concludes our time for today," he announced. "We'll continue our discussion of Stellaris's political evolution next class." As students began gathering their belongings, Seth approached the teacher's desk. His notebook filled with more notes than Solothar had seen any student take in years. "Thank you for the interesting lesson," he said sincerely. "I'm going to research more about those early agricultural techniques." Solothar smiled. "The adaptation process continues even now. Each generation of plants becomes more suited to our conditions." Zahara joined them, her ears perked forward in the Vortarian expression of enthusiasm. "I was wrong to dismiss history as boring," she admitted. "I didn't know much about my ancestors' journey. My family doesn't talk about this at all." "Many don't," Solothar acknowledged. "Sometimes painful histories get buried under the comfortable present." Hannah was the last to approach his desk as the classroom emptied. "Thank you for not denying my questions like other teachers do," she said quietly. "Some of them act like hybrids just appeared one day." Solothar assured her. "Your existence is an important chapter in our shared story, not a footnote to be ignored." "You know," she said thoughtfully, "I've always felt caught between worlds. Not human enough for some, not Vortarian enough for others. But hearing about our history," she paused, collecting her thoughts, "it makes me feel like I belong in a way I didn't understand before." Solothar nodded, offering her a smile and nothing more. "Thank you." She turned and joined the last students exiting the classroom. As the doors closed behind her, Solothar remained at the window, watching his students cross the courtyard below. They moved in mixed groups now, not segregated by species as they had been at the beginning of the class. He caught snippets of animated conversations drifting up, discussions about historical details, mentions of family stories they now wanted to investigate, debates about the governance structure he had described. One particular exchange between Seth and a Vortarian student caught his attention. "My great-grandmother was on that original ship as a baby," the Vortarian student was saying proudly. "She helped design the irrigation systems." "Really?" Seth responded with genuine interest. "My family came later, but my grandfather worked on the first stellar wine distillery." Their voices faded as they moved beyond his hearing range, but Solothar smiled to himself. This was exactly what he had hoped for. Students connecting their personal histories to the larger narrative, finding their place in the continuing story of Stellaris. He turned back to his desk and began arranging his teaching materials with a sense of satisfaction. The transformation from disengaged students to active participants in their own history had been remarkable. Where there had been boredom and disinterest at the beginning of class, he now sensed curiosity and even pride. Some parents would likely be surprised by their children's sudden interest. Some might be uncomfortable with questions about painful parts of their heritage. But those conversations, however awkward or emotional, would strengthen the connections between generations. And perhaps most importantly, hybrid students like Hannah would see themselves not as accidents or afterthoughts in Stellaris's history, but as the natural evolution of a society founded on cooperation between species. Solothar gathered his teaching robe and took one last look around the empty classroom. He had accomplished what he set out to do today, connecting these young people to their shared heritage and helping them understand that the story of Stellaris wasn't just a ship that arrived for repairs. It was about how humanity had offered so much more: opportunity, partnership, and eventually a new world under new rules. As he closed the classroom door behind him, he felt certain that at least some of his students would never see their history or themselves quite the same way again.